Welcome to the History Maps podcast. So consider the Karakum Desert.
Right.
Sand dunes just stretching across this vast, completely arid expanse that covers much of modern-day Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan.
It is a harsh place.
Yeah, it's an environment completely defined by extreme heat, shifting sands, and very minimal rainfall.
Absolutely.
And, when we discuss early urban societies, our focus almost universally drifts toward river valleys.
Inevitably.
Right? We look at the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, or the Nile in Egypt.
Or the predictable floodplains of the Indus Valley.
Exactly. Because we are taught that complex human civilization requires these massive, reliable bodies of water to cluster populations together.
You need water to sustain agriculture, so the assumption is you need a massive river valley.
But buried directly beneath the dunes of the Karakum lies this vast network of monumental palaces, highly engineered irrigation systems, and a deeply stratified society.
It completely disrupts the traditional narrative.
It really does. This is the Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex.
Frequently referred to as the Oxus Civilization.
Right. And today, the objective of this deep dive is to synthesize decades of field reports, environmental data, and modern genetic sequencing to really dissect this Middle Bronze Age society.
Because we are talking about a culture that flourished between 2400 and 1700 BCE in an incredibly harsh desert.
And they managed a multinational trade network.
Completely without a writing system.
Which is just, it forces a massive realignment of how we even categorize Bronze Age urbanization.
It really does. Because for generations, the historical narrative placed Central Asia strictly on the periphery of human development.
Like it was just empty space.
Exactly. It was categorized as this harsh hinterland populated entirely by nomadic pastoralists.
Right.
The default assumption was that true civilization existed only in the Near East or the Indus Valley.
And Central Asia was simply the land you had to cross to get between them.
Exactly. But the unearthing of this society, which we will often just abbreviate as the BMAC, it dismantles that assumption entirely.
Because we are looking at densely populated, hyper-engineered administrative hubs.
They were not peripheral at all. They were central nodes controlling these massive international trade routes.
Routes that span from the Iranian Plateau all the way down to the Indian subcontinent.
Right.
But what immediately stands out to me is how long this entire civilization managed to stay hidden from modern view.
It is a massive gap in the timeline of archaeology.
We are discussing a society that built defensive walls 10 meters high.
And central palace complexes the size of modern city blocks.
Yeah. Yet the broader archaeological world barely recognized its existence until the late 20th century.
That is true.
How does a civilization of that scale just get lost in the sand?
Well, the timeline of discovery was heavily fragmented, and that really delayed the global recognition of the society.
So when did we actually get the first clues?
The initial physical evidence actually surfaced back in 1904.
1904. Okay.
Yeah, an American geologist named Raphael Pumpelly was leading an excavation at a site called Anau.
And where exactly is Anau?
This is located near the Kopet Dag Mountains in southern Turkmenistan.
Okay, so he's digging there in 1904. What does he find?
Pumpelly found these early ceramic sequences and distinct signs of settled agriculture.
Right.
Now, in retrospect, we know those artifacts belong to the early precursors of the BMAC.
But at the time?
At the time, nothing, because archaeology relies entirely on context.
I see.
In 1904, there was no established framework for an advanced Central Asian Bronze Age culture.
So he just didn't know what he was looking at.
Exactly.
Huh.
Pumpelly found the pieces of a puzzle, but there was no picture on the box to guide him.
So the artifacts were just cataloged as isolated anomalies.
Right. They just sat in the record.
So a geologist finding ceramics in 1904 is just a single data point.
Exactly.
When did it actually coalesce into the discovery of a distinct civilization?
The structural breakthrough occurred much later, in the 1970s.
Okay, a big jump.
Huge jump. This was spearheaded by the Soviet archaeologist Viktor Sarianidi.
Right, Sarianidi.
He began leading the Margiana Archaeological Expedition. And Sarianidi did something crucial. He shifted the focus away from the mountain foothills.
And he moved directly into the deep desert oases.
Yes. He targeted the Dashli Oasis in northern Afghanistan.
Which corresponds to the ancient region of Bactria.
Exactly. And he also targeted the Murghab River Delta in Turkmenistan.
Which is historically known as Margiana.
Right. And this is where Sarianidi and his teams uncovered the massive fortified urban
He
centers.
found the cities.
They documented the monumental mud brick architecture, the elaborate necropolises filled with gold and bronze,
And a sprawling irrigation network.
Exactly. Sarianidi realized this was not a peripheral nomadic culture.
It was a distinct, centralized urban phenomenon.
Yes.
But wait, the 1970s and 1980s? That places this discovery squarely in the middle of the Cold War.
It does.
There was an iron curtain dividing global academic research just as sharply as it divided military alliances.
And that political divide significantly impacted the flow of knowledge.
Because they weren't sharing data.
Right. Sarianidi and his Soviet colleagues were conducting these extensive, highly detailed excavations.
But they were publishing their findings almost exclusively in Soviet academic journals.
In Russian.
Right.
So the methodology and the sheer scale of the discoveries at sites like Gonur Depe remained largely isolated.
Western scholars had very limited access to these sites.
Or the primary data. A few translations and summary papers trickled out, but it wasn't much.
So it wasn't until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in the 1990s that the barrier truly fell.
Exactly. When international borders opened and joint research projects began, the global archaeological community was suddenly confronted with a massive, fully formed Bronze Age society.
One that had to be integrated into the existing models of the ancient world.
Which was a massive undertaking for historians.
Which leads us directly into the naming debate.
Ah, yes, the naming debate.
Because archaeologists seem heavily divided on what to actually call this society.
Eerily divided.
Sarianidi coined the term Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, or BMAC.
Simply naming it after the two core geographical regions where he found the ruins.
Right. Then the French archaeologist Henri-Paul Frankfurt proposed calling it the Oxus Civilization.
Naming it after the ancient Oxus River, which is the modern Amu Darya.
And more recently, scholars like Bishion and Vadadi have proposed calling it the Greater Khorasan Civilization.
Because new surveys show the material culture spreads deep into northeastern Iran.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Does calling it the Oxus Civilization versus BMAC actually change how we understand the people?
It really does.
Or is this just modern academics planting flags in the sand to claim a piece of the discovery?
It's a fair question, but the terminology actually dictates the conceptual model of the society.
How so?
Well, when we define the boundaries of a culture, we're defining its origins and its reach. If we utilize Sarianidi's BMAC, we are strictly describing the core desert oases where the largest palaces were constructed.
So it frames the culture as an isolated desert phenomenon.
Exactly. Frankfurt's Oxus Civilization attempts to elevate the society to the status of its contemporaries.
By naming it after a river system.
Right. He places it on equal footing with the Nile or the Indus Valley civilizations.
And the recent push for Greater Khorasan Civilization.
That represents a fundamental shift in the data.
Because the borders are expanding.
Yes. Artifacts characteristic of this society like specific ceramics, stamp seals, and architectural styles. They've been documented far beyond the Murghab Delta.
Reaching as far as Sabzavar and Nishapur in Iran.
Exactly.
So expanding the name acknowledges a wider integrated cultural sphere.
It does.
It means those massive administrative hubs in the Karakum Desert might not be an isolated anomaly.
Right. They could be the highly specialized center of a much broader regional population spanning hundreds of miles.
Okay, but recognizing the scale of this society immediately presents a severe environmental contradiction.
It certainly does.
Because the Karakum Desert is fundamentally hostile to human settlement.
Very hostile.
We are talking about an environment that receives a meager 100 to 200 millimeters of annual rainfall.
Which is almost nothing.
To put that in perspective for you, the listener, that is less rain in an entire year than many coastal cities receive in a single heavy weekend storm.
You simply cannot sustain rain-fed agriculture on that little water.
Right. So how do you feed a complex, densely populated society in a wasteland?
Well, the survival of the BMAC inhabitants was predicated entirely on hyper-engineered water management.
They were sedentary farmers, but they couldn't rely on the sky.
No. Instead, they utilized the hydrology of the Murghab and Amu Darya rivers.
Okay.
These rivers flow down from the mountains, but they do not empty into an ocean or a sea.
Where do they go?
They flow directly out into the Karakum Desert.
And just disappear into the sand.
Eventually, yes. But the BMAC engineers capitalized on a geographical feature known as an alluvial fan.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of an alluvial fan.
Sure.
How does a society in 2400 BCE interact with that kind of geological formation?
Well, when a fast-moving river travels down a steep mountain gradient and suddenly hits a flat, open plain like the desert floor.
The water rapidly slows down.
Exactly. And as it loses velocity, it drops the sediment it was carrying.
So gravel, sand, and nutrient-rich silt.
Right. Over time, this sediment builds up into a massive triangle-shaped deposit that fans out across the landscape.
Okay, I can picture that.
The river channels naturally split and braid across this fan.
And the BMAC engineers recognize the agricultural potential of this nutrient-rich soil.
Yes. They didn't just settle near the natural river channels, they actively constructed extensive artificial canal networks branching off the main river.
So they're actively directing the seasonal floodwaters across vast tracts of the desert fringe.
Exactly. By controlling the flow of water, they transformed marginal arid land into highly productive agricultural oases.
But if they're going through the immense labor of digging canals across the desert, they must be growing crops that provide a massive caloric return.
Oh, they were.
What did they actually manage to pull out of the sand?
The archaeobotanical evidence is incredibly detailed here. At Togaluk 1, a major BMA site, researchers analyzed thousands of carbonized plant remains.
Recovered right from the soil stratigraphy.
Right. And the primary staples they found were hulled and naked barley and free-threshing wheat.
Okay, so heavy carbohydrates.
But they also cultivated broomcorn millet, lentils, and peas.
That is a lot of variety for a desert.
The analysis even confirmed the cultivation of fruits, specifically grapes and plums.
Grapes and plums in the Karakum. That is wild.
It is.
But that diversity is a critical strategy, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you rely entirely on a single crop, one bad season of pests or a blight destroys the entire society.
Exactly. By cultivating wheat, barley, legumes, and fruit simultaneously, they built a buffer against localized agricultural failure.
The resilience of the system relied on variety.
And local processing. Researchers also found Reches fragments and culm nodes in the soil.
What are those?
These are the physical joints and stems of the cereal plants.
Okay.
Finding them within the settlement boundaries proves that the processing, the threshing, and the storage of these crops were happening locally.
Right inside the administrative hubs.
Exactly. But their food supply was not limited to plants. They operated a highly integrated agropastoral system.
Meaning they integrated domesticated livestock directly into their farming practices.
Yes. The archaeological record shows they kept domesticated zebu cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs.
Right.
And the stratigraphy reveals deep dung layers directly associated with the agricultural zones.
Oh, so that indicates a symbiotic cycle.
Exactly. After they harvested the wheat and barley, they pastured their livestock on the stubble left in the fields.
The animals consumed the leftover plant matter.
And simultaneously deposit manure, fertilizing the soil for the next planting season.
Which is a closed-loop system. That is essential when you are farming in a nutrient-poor desert environment.
It was highly efficient.
They also harnessed animal power for labor and logistics, right?
They did. There is evidence of early camel domestication.
Which is huge.
At the site of Gonur Depe, archaeologists recovered a small clay model of a cart drawn by a camel.
And this dates back to roughly 2200 BCE.
Right. Domesticating the Bactrian camel and utilizing it for draft pulling is a technological leap.
It fundamentally alters the society's capabilities.
Because a camel can endure the extreme heat and the lack of water that would quickly kill a horse or an ox.
So by hitching camels to wheeled carts, the BMA were not just farming an isolated oasis.
No, they were establishing the infrastructure for heavy overland logistics.
They could transport surplus grain or construction materials across the arid, hostile stretches of desert that separated their canal systems.
Exactly.
But the timeline of this society's peak becomes deeply complex when we look at the broader global climate data.
It really does.
The BMAC rises to prominence around 2200 BCE, but globally, 2200 BCE is marked by the 4.2 kiloyear climate event.
Right, the mega drought.
This was a severe global mega drought. This is the exact same climatic shift that caused devastating aridification in Mesopotamia.
Contributing heavily to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire.
Right. When the rain stopped in the Near East, their rain-fed agriculture collapsed.
Totally failed.
Yet, right in the middle of this global drought, the BMAC seems to flourish and build massive cities.
It seems counterintuitive.
How does a desert civilization thrive during a megadrought?
Well, the response to the 4.2 kiloyear event highlights the fundamental difference in how these societies were structured.
Okay, unpack that.
The Akkadian Empire relied heavily on predictable rainfall across broad agricultural plains.
So when the rain failed, the society destabilized.
Exactly. The BMA, conversely, was already adapted to an extreme arid environment.
So the lack of rain wasn't a sudden shock.
No, it was their permanent reality. Their entire societal structure was already engineered around the centralized control of scarce river water.
Right.
So when the global drought intensified and the river volumes likely decreased, the entities that controlled the irrigation canals just gained even more leverage.
It makes me think about the life support system on a modern space station.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Because if the water recyclers go offline, it does not matter how advanced the rest of the station is. The environment becomes instantly uninhabitable.
Right.
The BMAC engineers were not just farming, they were maintaining a massive, fragile terraforming project.
Absolutely.
If the irrigation network failed, the desert would reclaim the land in a single season.
The margin for error was absolute zero.
Wow. Wait, maintaining a delta-wide canal system requires an immense coordination of labor.
Immense. You have to dredge the canals constantly to prevent silt buildup.
You have to repair the embankments.
And enforce strict water rationing between different agricultural sectors.
You cannot manage that level of infrastructure with a loose confederation of independent farming villages.
No, you can't. The environmental pressure forced them into extreme centralization.
They required an overarching authority to dictate the flow of water and manage the subsequent agricultural surplus.
Exactly.
And when a society requires absolute centralized authority just to survive, they build architecture to project and protect that authority.
Which leads us directly to the Kuala fortresses.
And specifically the massive complex of Gonur Depe.
Right, Gonur Depe.
This site covers roughly 55 hectares and is widely considered the capital or the central administrative node of the BMSC in Margiana.
The scale of Gonur Depe is striking.
Describe it for us.
To visualize Gonur North, picture a massive elliptical complex.
Okay.
At the absolute center sits a monumental building, generally referred to as a palace.
And how big is this palace?
It measures 150 meters by 140 meters.
That is massive.
It is. Surrounding this central palace are multiple temples, distinct ritual areas, large water reservoirs, and the royal necropolis.
And this entire administrative core is enclosed by massive defensive structures built from sun-dried mud bricks.
Right. And the specific architectural style of these walls is what researchers classify as Kala architecture.
Kala architecture. It is highly distinct, isn't it?
Very distinct. The complex is surrounded by very thick outer walls, doubled by thinner inner walls.
Okay, so a double wall system.
Yes. And the space between the outer and inner walls creates a corridor.
But this is not an open walkway.
No, the corridor is heavily partitioned by cross walls, dividing the space into numerous small segmented rooms.
We also see a clear evolution in the defensive towers, right?
We do. In the early phases, such as Gonur North, the perimeter towers are square.
Okay.
In the later phases, like the smaller Gonur South complex, which was constructed around 1900 BCE, the architecture shifts to incorporate round towers.
Now, this Kuala architecture presents a severe analytical contradiction for archaeologists, doesn't it?
It really does. On a macro level, from a satellite view, these structures look undeniably militaristic.
They possess the footprint and the sheer mass of fortresses designed to withstand a prolonged siege.
They look like castles. However, when you analyze the granular mechanics of the architecture, the militaristic interpretation just falls apart.
Break that down for us. Why doesn't it work?
For instance, the thick outer walls entirely lack slit windows or embrasures.
Which means there is no place for a defender to shoot an arrow or throw a spear from behind the safety of the wall.
Exactly.
But
A defensive wall without firing slits is highly inefficient against an organized assault.
you are building a massive shield, but providing your troops no way to strike back.
Right. Furthermore, those partitioned corridors running between the inner and outer walls are completely unsuited for military logistics.
Because you can't move through them quickly.
Exactly. In a siege, if an enemy breaches a section of the outer wall, the defenders need to rapidly redeploy troops along the wall to plug the gap.
But in the Kuala architecture, troop movement through the internal corridor is impossible.
Because the path is blocked every few meters by the cross walls, creating those small segmented rooms.
Okay, so let's think about this. If you build a massive wall, but put no windows in it to shoot arrows through,
Right.
and you block the internal walkways so guards cannot move quickly.
It becomes very difficult to classify it as a military fortress.
Could this architecture serve a completely different purpose?
That is the prevailing modern theory.
Like, if they are producing massive amounts of surplus grain, could this just be the Bronze Age equivalent of an exclusive, heavily guarded warehouse district?
That hypothesis aligns much more closely with the environmental and economic realities of the BMSC.
Right.
Because if the survival of the entire population depends on the centralized storage and careful rationing of agricultural surplus, the barley, wheat, and lentils, those stores require absolute protection.
They needed protection from the encroaching sand dunes and the extreme desert wind.
And they likely needed protection from internal civil unrest as well.
Because in a year where the river runs low and rations are cut, the central authority must secure the food supply.
Exactly. The small partitioned rooms within the walls could easily function as secure, temperature-regulated storage silos.
There's also the psychological aspect of monumental architecture.
Always.
If you are the administrative class controlling the water and the food, building a 10-meter-high, windowless mud brick wall is a very stark way of communicating social hierarchy.
It is a very loud statement.
You are visually separating the elite administrators on the inside from the agricultural laborers working the fields on the outside.
The architecture physically delineates the sacred and administrative interior from the agrarian exterior.
Right.
The walls project order and permanence in an otherwise chaotic environment.
So, to truly understand the nature of the hierarchy living inside these walled-off complexes, we must examine their funerary practices.
Because how a society treats its dead provides the most granular, unvarnished look at their social stratification.
Which brings us to the Royal Necropolis, located in the southeast corner of Gonur North.
Right.
These are not simple, shallow graves dug into the sand.
No, not at all.
The BMAC constructed underground, house-like structures called hypogea.
Yes, these are vaulted brick chambers built entirely below the surface.
And constructing subterranean rooms to house the deceased requires a massive expenditure of labor and resources.
It does. The Royal Necropolis at Gonur Depe contains some of the most elaborate and complex burial arrangements documented in the entire Middle Bronze Age.
The sheer volume of wealth deposited in these hypogea confirms a rigidly stratified society.
But it is the specific nature of the interments, the deliberate arrangement of animals and artifacts, that reveals the unique value system of the Oxus Civilization.
Let's talk about the animal burials because they are highly specific and required an immense sacrifice of wealth.
Very true.
In grave 3200, excavators found the complete skeleton of a foal.
Right.
But the foal was not just placed in the dirt, it was resting on a four-wheeled wooden wagon equipped with bronze rims.
And radiocarbon dating places this burial right around 2250 BCE.
And there are others. In grave 3895, they found a completely dismembered cow.
Yes.
Grave 3597 contained a donkey buried with lambs positioned carefully near its tail.
And grave 4065 held the arranged remains of 7 dogs.
7 dogs in one grave. What does all of this mean?
The inclusion of these animals is deeply symbolic of economic power.
Okay.
Take the wagon, for example. A four-wheeled wagon with bronze rims in 2250 BCE is a piece of high technology.
It represents advanced carpentry and metallurgy.
Exactly. Burying that wagon, permanently removing it from the functional economy, signifies the immense status of the individual it accompanied.
It is a massive flex of wealth.
It is. The arrangement of the dogs, donkeys, and cattle likely corresponds to the specific domains of wealth, or the administrative purview the deceased controlled in life.
So they were basically taking their economic portfolios into the afterlife.
That is a great way to put it, yes.
But the most profound insight comes from analyzing the human remains, specifically the disparity between the male and female burials.
This is where the data gets incredibly compelling.
The data consistently demonstrates that the women's graves are wealthier than the men's graves.
Yes, consistently.
And the defining indicator of this wealth is not just gold or decorative jewelry. High-status women were overwhelmingly buried with compartmented stamp seals.
The stamp seals are the critical data point for understanding BMA sociology.
Explain how a stamp seal actually functioned.
Well, in a Bronze Age society, a stamp seal is an administrative tool, not a piece of personal adornment.
Okay.
Think about how you might secure a sensitive shipment today with a tamper-evident seal.
Right, like a security tag.
Exactly. In the BMAC, if an administrator filled a ceramic jar with surplus grain or trade goods, they would secure the mouth of the jar with leather or cloth, bind it with a cord, and press a wet lump of clay over the knot.
And then they press their seal into the clay.
They would press their personal, geometrically carved stone seal into that wet clay.
So the unique pattern left in the clay served as a signature.
Yes, it authorized the transaction and guaranteed the integrity of the contents.
And the fact that these seals are heavily concentrated in female burials strongly indicates that women held significant administrative, economic, and perhaps religious authority.
It points directly to that.
Does this indicate a matriarchal administrative class?
It is a strong possibility.
Because we see similar patterns in the Assur society of roughly the same era.
Right, the old Assyrian trade networks.
In Assur, the men traveled long distances as itinerant merchants, while the women remained in the urban centers.
Managing the complex business estates, handling the ledgers, and controlling the capital.
Exactly. So if the BMA functioned as a massive logistical hub for international trade, which the artifact record proves they did, they required a permanent, highly organized administrative class to manage the warehouses.
To oversee the agricultural surplus and authorize the distribution of goods.
Right, so if the male population was primarily engaged in the physical transport of goods across the Iranian Plateau or down through the mountain passes into the Indus Valley,
The women may have served as the anchor of the urban administration.
we see men buried with weapons like bronze axes, and we see women buried with the administrative seals.
It is a striking dichotomy.
Are we looking at a society where physical force or martial capability was outsourced or deemed a different, perhaps a lower tier of status?
While women control the actual levers of economic power,
Right.
it challenges the default historical assumption that physical violence and ultimate societal authority are always synonymous.
Because in an extreme desert environment where survival dictates the meticulous management of water and stored grain.
The person who holds the seal to the granary possesses far more actual functional power than the person holding a bronze weapon.
The concentration of administrative tools in female burials forces us to consider that BMA society valued continuity, logistics, and resource management above martial display. And the resources they were managing were not limited to local wheat and barley.
Not at all.
The wealth found in these graves included materials transported from thousands of miles away.
Which reveals the true capability of the BMAC.
They were not just a farming society, they were the ultimate Bronze Age middlemen.
They operated what archaeologists call an interaction sphere.
The Middle Asia interaction sphere.
Right. This refers to the BMAC's role as the geographic and economic nexus connecting the major powers of the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE.
Okay, so picture a map of the ancient world.
Inside the administrative centers of the Karakum Desert, archaeologists have found etched carnelian beads and worked ivory that originated far to the east in the Indus Valley.
They found cylinder seals carved in the distinct, intricate style of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, far to the west.
They recovered silver vessels that perfectly replicate the designs of Elamite craftsmen from southwestern Iran.
They were pulling in luxury goods from every point on the compass.
They were massive importers of raw materials and foreign luxury items.
But the BMAC were not merely passive recipients sitting at a crossroads.
No, they possessed highly specialized craft guilds that produced unique goods specifically for export.
Like what?
Well, they manufactured intricate chlorite vessels.
What is chlorite?
Chlorite is a soft stone that BMAC artisans carved with distinct geometric patterns. These are known as gouache motifs, which look like complex intertwining bands.
Okay.
And they carved these alongside native imagery like snakes and scorpions.
And they made the statuettes too, right?
Yes, they produced composite female statuettes, known to scholars as Bactrian princesses.
And those were carved from contrasting dark chlorite and white limestone.
Exactly. And these specific BMA seeds have been excavated in distant sites across Iran, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley.
Proving a massive bidirectional flow of trade.
Yes.
How exactly did this trade function mechanically? Were BMAC merchants loading up camels and traveling all the way to Akkad, or were Mesopotamian traders crossing the desert to reach Margiana?
The prevailing model suggests highly organized caravans and the movement of itinerant craftsmen.
Okay.
We see a profound blending of artistic motifs in the archaeological record.
Give us an example of that blending.
For example, a merchant might carry a seal that possesses the physical shape used in the Indus Valley, but the image carved into it depicts an Elamite mythological scene, executed by a BMA artisan.
Wow. Okay.
This hybridization implies that craftsmen and merchants were traveling constantly along these routes.
Bringing their techniques, adapting to local tastes, and creating a shared international visual language.
Right.
Now, managing an international trade network requires strict regulation.
It does.
And the BMA utilized a standardized decimal sexagesimal system of stone weights.
That is correct.
Wait, a decimal sexagesimal system. So they were combining a base 10 system, like we use for modern currency, with a base 60 system, like how we measure minutes and seconds.
Yes, they were.
How does a Bronze Age trader actually use a stone weight to calculate that?
Well, it implies a highly sophisticated level of mathematics used to establish exchange rates.
Okay.
If a merchant brings lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and wants to trade it for Elamite silver, both parties must agree on the exact mass of the goods.
So the BMAC manufactured precise stone weights that followed this mathematical ratio.
Right. Standardizing weights across an entire civilization ensures trust in long-distance transactions.
A merchant from the Indus Valley knows that a unit of weight in Gonur Depe is exactly the same as a unit of weight hundreds of miles away.
Exactly.
But this intricate, standardized system brings us to the most perplexing contradiction of the Oxus Civilization.
And is a major contradiction.
They managed a multinational trade network, standardized their mathematics, and built massive administrative centers completely without a writing system.
They did.
Now, there's one artifact that always gets brought up in this context, the Anau seal.
Ah, the Anau seal.
This is a single, tiny stone object found at the site of Anau in the year 2000.
Right.
It features 5 geometric markings that bear a striking resemblance to Chinese small seal characters.
Yes, they do look very similar.
And when this was found, it generated massive headlines claiming the BMAC had developed a written language.
It did. But the Anau seal is a profound anomaly, and the rigorous consensus among experts rejects it as evidence of BMAC literacy.
Why is it rejected?
Because the markings on the Anau seal closely match a jet seal found in Xinjiang, China. But that Xinjiang seal dates much later, to roughly 700 BCE.
And the BMA collapsed 1,000 years before that.
Exactly. Whether the Anau seal is an intrusive artifact that somehow slipped into an older stratigraphic layer, or just a local administrative marker that coincidentally mimics Qin symbols.
It does not constitute a functional writing system.
No. We've found no clay tablets, no archives, no standardized ledgers, and no monumental inscriptions.
The BMAC remains firmly classified as a pre-literate or non-literate society. Think about the complexity of that. They have no written language. Yet they are running a multinational supply chain, managing agricultural distribution for tens of thousands of people and enforcing standardized trade weights.
It is staggering to think about.
How do you operate a global logistics company entirely on a handshake and visual branding without a single written ledger?
It requires an immense reliance on memory, oral tradition, and highly specific visual semiotics.
Right, the symbols.
The compartmented stamp seals we discussed earlier likely functioned as a comprehensive visual language.
Because they couldn't write down the details of the transaction.
Right. The specific geometric patterns, the intertwining lines, or the mythological beasts carved into the seal communicated multiple layers of information.
So the image could convey the authority of the administrator, the origin of the goods, and the exact nature of the transaction.
Exactly. They replace written ledgers with an absolute rigid system of visual branding and administrative trust.
Now, the presence of all this foreign material, combined with their unique local architecture and lack of writing, generated a massive historical controversy regarding the identity of these people.
Yes, the identity question was a huge debate.
Genetically and linguistically, where do the builders of the Oxus Civilization fit into the broader human family tree?
This question leads us straight into the Indo-Iranian debate, which dominated the field for decades.
Because this is where the disciplines of archaeology, linguistics, and modern ancient DNA sequencing just collide.
They absolutely collide.
For decades, Victor Serineti argued vehemently that the BMSC represented the original Indo-Iranians.
He did. He based this entirely on specific architectural and artifactual interpretations.
Like the structures at Gonur South.
Right. During his excavations at Gonur South, he uncovered structures that he identified as Proto-Zoroastrian fire temples.
And he found specific ceramic vessels containing residues that he claimed were evidence of a Soma cult shrine.
Soma being the sacred intoxicating ritual drink described extensively in the ancient Indo-Iranian texts, the Rig Veda and the Avesta.
Right. So Serineti concluded that the people of the BMSC were practicing an early form of Zoroastrianism.
And were therefore the direct ancestors of the Indo-Iranian speaking peoples who later migrated to populate Iran and India.
But modern science, specifically the revolution in ancient DNA analysis, has completely dismantled that theory.
It completely overturned it.
How does sequencing DNA from a 4,000-year-old skeleton actually prove an archaeologist wrong?
Well, ancient DNA analysis provides an objective biological record that cuts through subjective interpretations of pottery or architecture.
Right.
Geneticists extract trace amounts of DNA preserved in the dense bone of the skull, specifically the petrous bone, and sequence the entire genome of the individual.
Okay, so when they sequence the genomes of individuals buried at Gonur Depe and other BMSC sites during their peak urban phase between 2250 and 1700 BCE, what did they find?
The results were definitive. The population was overwhelmingly descended from Neolithic Iranian farmers.
So these were the indigenous populations who had been farming the Iranian Plateau and Central Asia for millennia.
Exactly. The geneticists also found a minor component, roughly 10 to 20%, of South Asian hunter-gatherer ancestry.
And the most important finding was what they did not find in the DNA.
Crucially, they found negligible to zero-step ancestry during the peak phase of the BMAC.
Okay, clarify what step ancestry means in this context.
Step ancestry is the specific genetic signature associated with the Andronovo culture to the north.
Right.
The Andronovo were pastoral nomads living on the Eurasian steppe, and they are universally identified by modern linguists and geneticists as the actual Proto-Indo-Europeans.
So the people designing the canals and building the palaces at Gonur Depe had absolutely no genetic connection to the Indo-European steppe nomads.
Precisely. The genetic profile confirms the BMAC was an indigenous, pre-existing civilization.
They were genetically distinct from the Indo-Iranian pastoralists.
Sarianides' theory was biologically impossible based on the population present during the construction of the cities.
Sarianides looked at a highly fired mud brick oven and called it a Zoroastrian fire temple. He looked at a ritual cup and called it a Soma shrine.
Right.
But the DNA proves these people were not the Indo-Iranians associated with Zoroaster. Doesn't this show how easily we can project a famous historical narrative onto silent stones simply because we want to find the origins of a known religion?
It serves as a profound cautionary tale regarding the limits of archaeological interpretation.
Because material culture is silent.
Exactly. If an archaeologist is searching for the origins of Zoroastrianism, every ash pit begins to look like a sacred fire altar.
Right.
The genetic data forces the field to separate the physical objects from massive linguistic and religious assumptions. We cannot assign a language or religion to a pot simply because of where it was buried.
But the Indo-Iranians do eventually enter the picture, right?
They do later on.
And the interaction between these two distinct groups is recorded in language.
Yes. Linguists have proposed what is called a substrate theory.
Okay, what is the substrate theory?
They argue that the indigenous BMAC population spoke an unknown, non-Indo-European language.
Okay.
Later, when the Indo-Iranian speaking pastoralists finally did migrate south from the northern steppes and interacted with the BMA, the pastoralists absorbed local BMAC words into their own vocabulary.
But how do linguists identify borrowed words from a language that was never written down?
Linguists analyze the root structures of words in modern Indo-Iranian languages. They look for specific terms related to agriculture, irrigation, and mud brick architecture that have no etymological roots in the broader Proto-Indo-European language tree.
Like what?
For example, consider the word kama, which translates to vault or architectural arch.
Okay.
The pastoral nomads of the Eurasian steppe lived in mobile tents or light timber structures. They did not build monumental mud brick vault, nor did they dig massive irrigation canals.
Therefore, their language possessed no words for these concepts.
Exactly. When they migrated south and encountered the complex architecture and farming techniques of the BMA, they adopted the local technology.
And they simultaneously adopted the indigenous vocabulary for that technology.
Right. The language of the Oxus Civilization survives as a ghost substrate within modern languages.
This integration between the indigenous urban farmers and the incoming steppe nomads happened concurrently with massive environmental shifts.
It did. And these shifts led directly to the sudden and somewhat mysterious end of the Oxus Civilization.
Let's trace the mechanics of this collapse.
The timeline of the decline is generally marked around 1700 BCE.
So what changes in the archaeological record at that point?
At this point, the massive, highly centralized administrative centers like Gonur North are largely abandoned.
Okay.
The monumental building projects cease entirely. The intricate compartmented seals and the elaborate elite burials filled with international trade goods disappear.
The centralized state stops functioning.
It does.
But it is not a violent collapse. We often associate the end of a Bronze Age civilization with warfare.
Right, but there are no destruction layers, indicating a massive invading army breached the walls and burned Gonur Depe to the ground.
So there is no evidence of a cataclysmic siege.
No. The stratigraphy indicates a phased, methodical de-urbanization occurring over 2 to 3 centuries.
To understand the mechanism of the collapse, we have to look back at the fragility of their environment.
Exactly. We discussed how they mastered the water of the Murghab and Amidaria rivers.
Right.
But around 3,900 years before present, or roughly 1900 BCE, another major climate event triggered further severe aridification across Central Asia.
So the environment, which was already hostile, became even drier.
Yes.
Furthermore, rivers traversing a desert plain are not static entities.
They naturally meander.
The Murghab and Amu Darya rivers began to shift their courses naturally, moving the water supply further away from the established canal networks that fed the cities.
The shifting rivers compounded the crisis. But we must also factor in the devastating consequences of human engineering.
You mean the irrigation itself?
Yes. The BMAs practiced centuries of intensive irrigation.
And what happens when you do that in a desert?
When you take river water, which naturally contains trace amounts of dissolved minerals and salts, and you spread it over a desert field, the intense sun evaporates the water almost immediately.
Oh.
The water turns to vapor, but the trace salts are left behind in the topsoil.
Year after year, decade after decade.
You keep adding water, and the sun keeps evaporating it, leaving more salt behind. This process is called secondary soil salinization.
Why is salt in the soil a fatal problem for agriculture?
As the salt concentration in the topsoil increases over centuries, it alters the osmotic pressure of the soil.
Meaning the plants can't drink.
Exactly. Eventually, the salt concentration becomes so high that it literally pulls moisture out of the plant roots. The barley and wheat dehydrate and die, regardless of how much river water you pour over the fields.
The land becomes toxic to the crops that sustain the population.
After 500 years of intensive farming, the ecological limits of their oasis terraforming were finally reached.
The land was poisoned by the very water used to sustain it.
It was an inescapable ecological trap.
So the environmental debt finally came due. How did the society adapt when the fields stopped yielding grain?
They decentralized. The enormous populations concentrated around Gonur Depe could no longer be fed.
The centralized administrative structure dissolved because there was no longer a massive agricultural surplus to manage or protect.
Exactly. The society dispersed into smaller rural settlements near the shifting river channels.
Concurrently, we see the physical arrival of the Andronovo and Tazabagab pastoralists migrating down from the northern steppes.
Right. And we trace this in the physical record because the coarse, incised pottery used by the nomads begins to appear directly alongside late BMAC artifacts.
So they are living side by side.
Yes. And eventually, their genetic markers begin to mix with the local indigenous population.
So the urban farmers shifted to a more mobile, pastoral lifestyle, integrating directly with the steppe peoples.
They did.
If the environment failed them, and they systematically packed up, abandoned the cities, and integrated with the nomads to survive, is it accurate to call it a collapse?
It is a good question.
Or is it just a highly logical societal pivot when maintaining a city in the desert becomes ecologically impossible?
Well, collapse is frequently a loaded term that implies extinction.
Right, like they all just died out.
But the people of the Oxus Civilization did not vanish. Their genetic lineage constitutes a significant portion of modern Central Asian populations today.
And their architectural and agricultural vocabulary survived by being absorbed into the languages of the steppe nomads.
What collapsed was the centralized urban administrative structure. The era of the desert kings and the walled palaces ended.
The society recognized that hyper-urbanization was no longer a viable survival strategy.
And they adapted by adopting the mobility of their pastoral neighbors. It is a profound testament to human resilience, choosing radical transformation over starvation.
Let's synthesize the journey of this deep dive. We have explored a society that thrived in an absolute wasteland.
Mastering the mechanics of alluvial fans to build massive, windowless administrative centers.
They empowered a class of female administrators to manage the distribution of extreme wealth.
And they controlled an international Bronze Age trade network, moving goods from the Indus to Mesopotamia.
All without ever writing a single sentence.
And ultimately, when the rivers shifted and the soil salted, they dissolved back into the landscape, seamlessly integrating with the nomads of the steppe.
They stand as a highly unique model of Bronze Age complexity,
They're developed entirely independent of the major river valley civilizations we traditionally study.
proving that urban centralization can occur in the most marginal environments on Earth. It leaves us with a final concept to consider. Think about our modern definition of civilization itself. We are taught from a young age that writing is a core, non-negotiable requirement for a complex society.
It is the standard metric.
We assume that without the written word, a society cannot organize labor, manage agricultural ledgers, or enforce laws across long distances.
Right.
Yet the BMAC maintains standardized international trade weights, monumental architecture, and a strict, highly functioning social hierarchy for 500 years without leaving behind a single written document.
It is incredible.
Could our heavy reliance on the written word blind us to entirely different, equally advanced ways that ancient human minds organized and sustained complex societies? Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.